Greetings, warriors. We got a fun one today. Really, really liked writing this chapter. It, yeah, it's a powerful one. As I was mentioning last time, as the book progressed, the character of Harold just became so potent, so capable in the eyes of my writing. So today we are doing chapter 34, Power for Money, Money for Power. Harold stood there on his ship and looked down at the place where he slept, violated. He'd known, a part of him had always known, Svein wouldn't stay to him loyal forever. The argument they'd had the day before was the warning sign, but so soon after such a warning, to have to deal with this? It was inconceivable. It was unconscionable. Now thou see, he began quietly, solemnly to those standing with him and seeing the same sight in his bed. What trust and friendship givest thou, when thou art full willing to let it fall into another's hand? The men all stared at where their commander, their lord, slept, where he had decided, of course, not to sleep last night, where instead he had placed a lump of wood to take his place beneath the blankets. In that lump of wood, standing proud and defiant, was an axe that had been thrust down into the prostrate form that was mistaken for Harald. Harald and Svein Olfsson had sat at a table that day before in this place, this strange place between union and discord. They'd been discussing something irrelevant and had most certainly been a pretext for what they actually meant. They'd been talking of what in the world was most valuable, of banners and battles. What they really meant to say was their arguing over the offer Magnus had sent to Harold, offering a truce and alliance. And Harold wanted to take that truce. Harold and Magnus, of course, were related by blood, and thus the prospect of a truce between them made perfect sense, especially given what they had to offer the other. After the turbulent discussion between Harold and Svein, he had decided to sleep within the bulwark of his vessels and put a serving boy to watch his place of rest. He was, however, perturbed by the veiled anger he'd heard in his friend's voice, and so had put a long block of wood in his own place under the sheets. And now, here he stood with his men, looking down at the axe that was meant to carve his head apart. Idiocy it would be to stay. Idiocy, perhaps, it was not to set more guards and catch the would-be killer in the night. But here he stood with his men, knowing they could not remain in this place. Now we can see, he said, looking still at that axe, that we will never be equals to Svein if he were to practice such treachery against us. So we need to leave, and again in my life, we need to leave soon. Our flight cannot be delayed. All at once, Harold turned to a swift and hard action. He began to order men to gather their things and place them on the galleys, to take together the riches and keep quietly their activities, and they'd flown from the place they'd made camp with Svein. Many of the forces were Harald's, and enough others were of the Swedish king Anon's. These men owed no love to Svein, and so chose to sail off north with Harold. An army such as theirs, with ship and wars done under sail, were able to mobilize and be gone swiftly. Some told tales of the axe that was put into the wooden lump beneath the blankets. Some wondered at the presence of the footboy who'd made a watch Wondering why indeed, if there had been a watch, how could the assassin have found his way to the bed without the alarm being raised? Perhaps some whispered too that it had been Harold's wish to meet the offer of King Magnus favorably and knew that Svein would never desire such a unity. These whispers, of course, were never raised to higher volume. Only ever were the questions asked, never accusation made. The fleet sailed north along the coast to a port town named Onslow, which rests at the very northern end of a long and narrow fjord in the south of the country. All their way they saw the forts of the men of Magnus the Norway king, and ever they went, they made no war. One such place they saw, however, gave them more pause than the others. On the west side of the fjord's mouth, they saw the clear remnants of a stronghold that had been destroyed. Another victim of the mysterious raiding force that Harold's men had begun to call by the only name they'd heard to describe them, the Varangian. Reports would come at times indicating that while Harold warred with Magnus, someone was warring on them both. Many times had Harold considered sending out a party of hunters looking for these ghost raiders, but every time the war had taken precedent. Perhaps now that peace was possible, there would be time for such a hunt. In the middle of the day, they sailed into the port of Onslow, Harold standing at the prow of his ship and watching as a change to the world approached him. He did have that strange sense again that it was the port that came to him. He was stationary. It was the world that moved around him. As it had been many times before, Harold was the first off the ship. He leapt from the prow before they were close enough to tie and landed heavily on the wood planking, enjoying the sensation of it groaning beneath his weight and power. "Where is the king?" he called as he landed. There were attendants and warriors and workers all around. He was always aware that death could be his reward for his boldness, but knew also that death was the reward all men earned for living anyway. "The king is in the hall," said a Norse warrior. "You I call brother," Harold said, and walked up to the warrior. "I have no other name to call you. Aye, so brother it shall be." He put a coin of Roman gold into the warrior's hand then. The man saw the gold and started to speak, but Harold put his fingers into his mouth. "No, no, do not tell me your name, damn name, I don't care. The money is to buy some quiet. Show me the home of this king." The warrior spit Harold's fingers out and spat into the water, wiping his tongue on his sleeve then. Harold walked past him in a haste while the ship was tied up behind him, and his men rolled their eyes at their leader's manner. Through an entire group of enemy warriors, without the support of his men, he knew he was safe and protected by the laws of hospitality, but his attendants and retainers were still horrified, but mostly annoyed. He stalked past yet another group of warriors along yet another wooden walkway to yet another goddamn king's hall to speak with some powerful man about peace or war. Someday soon, he would sit at the high place of the throne, and he would accept foreign warlords who came sniffing for power. He had better damn well. He found, however, that this King Magnus, had chosen a place where there was no hall to demonstrate power, no doubt. The king would receive Harold in an army camp. There were hundreds of strong canvas tents making for the grand encampment of Magnus, and Harold stalked around looking for the most opulent and large to find out this king. When he found what must clearly be the king's tent, Harold himself opened the flap. Of course, it wasn't already open. The sun shone down, and there was no snow or rain falling. He stood there a moment, breathing in the sweet scents of the war tent. Again. Where is my nephew, the King Magnus? Is that you, Lord? He asked accusingly. He pointed at the powerfully dressed warrior king who sat on a seat within the tent. The man had light blonde hair and looked beyond his clothing, jewels, and finery to be completely ordinary. Harald Sigurdsson, half-brother to my father Olaf the Saint. You are welcome to my hall, though by appearances you make yourself welcome here. Has this been your manner, uncle? Or are you so fond of yourself that you are impertinent in the house of a king? Honor! Great king, it is honor I chose to greet you herewith. He strode into the tent, though it was not deep. As he came in, his eyes looked not to either side, but remaining on the king. He did not seek out hidden killers in the shadows around. He trusted this man's hospitality. You honor me? Asked King Magnus, amused. I do. Long I pondered how to treat with you. Could I match your power? No. Your skill in battle, perhaps. Your holiness, your piety? Only God knows such things. What then could I match? He asked the question loudly to those who stood and sat about this man. All were enraptured listening to him. And it is hubris you've chosen to treat with? Harold laughed. No, not pride and hubris, no. King Magnus, who is called the Good. I come to you with a grand display of my expression. This is Harold. This is who I am. I see that you have had me greeted with your own expression. The king now laughed, and this gave those around him leave to chuckle at the strange display as well. And then, you have my curiosity, uncle. What expression did I treat with you? Warriors on the landing, more on the approach, and then no guard outside your tent to open the tent doors. You would have had my retainers open it. You show me your military might in the first, and then allow me my own display of strength and power. The king considered this a moment. You have seen through my demonstrations brilliantly. Sure I did, Harold thought with a satisfied skepticism. Magnus was a king. And if there was one thing he'd learned about kings and rulers like this, it was that they were always willing to accept cleverness and vanity if it could be assumed as their own. Have you a drink for me? Ale or mead or beer? Harold asked. He then caught eyes with a man who stared at him with such apparent and obvious hatred that he feared the man would attack. He knew he could kill him easily if needed, but this would end the negotiation too soon. Come, the laws of this grand hospitality have been put into my favor for this meeting, have they not? Of course, but let us go outside. I tire of sitting within these canvas walls. He stood with apparent alacrity. Set the table ready for a meal that befits this meeting and bring this Harold what he asks for, the king said in his strong, unwavering voice. And Lord Harold, which would you like? Asked an unsure attendant somewhere near them. Did not you hear him? Magnus said as he emerged out into the grounds as in front of his tent. Ale and mead and beer, bring all them. Harold strode around the square. He paused then before the man and who continued to look at him with that strange loathing. And who is this that seems to not want me here? Einar, come away, King Magnus ordered. I would rather stay, Lord the King, the man replied. Einar? You are not Einar Thambarskelfir, are you? I know some little of you, not too much. The man narrowed his eyes. He was about 65 and had a proud face beneath his long gray silver hair. He looked distinguished in all manner and hateful. They stared at each other, one young and energetic in his look, the other aged and wise in his. Then from the direction of the ships, Harold's own retinue arrived and made their entrance. Lord Harold, said his attendant Einar in a huff. Please, Lord, you cannot. Apparently I can, Harold said, strongly cutting off the man. He turned to him, breaking the contest he'd fallen into with this Einar Thambar Skelfir. He looked back, but the man had made the wise move of turning and going from the place of their meeting. Now then, you will share in the drink I have been offered, and we will have this meeting begin in earnest, Harold said to his men. My lord King Magnus, have you a map to this great kingdom of yours? On a table, perhaps? I love these, and would be quite fond of seeing it. Then the first of the cups were brought to him as Harold's imposing guards came into the square and showed their presence. Harold took it and drank. This first was a brown beer, and he liked it. He turned and handed it to Einar. Drink! Another cup came, as the attendant took the first uncertainly. Harold was then handed another cup. This one was of the ale, and after a sip he found that he did not like it at all. No, he said, shaking his head. He handed this one to his guard, Håkon. Lord, I drink, old friend, drink. Finally, the last cup was brought to him, and he readied himself for it. The last of the cups was the biggest, and this was filled with an opaque yellow mead. He held out the cup toward Magnus. To God and to the king, may our meeting be made in peace and honest fairness. He poured out the first drink to the floor, and he was generous in his pouring. Then he drank a great quaff from it. That is good, finally. Now then, king, is there a map we can look over and talk? An attendant each. Many here wish a swift and amicable end to this war, do they not? He said loudly, and many agreed. There is such a map I have, a drawn map of this North Sea. But you have sailed hard these past few nights, I think. How many men have you with you? Not wanting to start any more hostility with you, I brought a modest amount, a lowly number, my personal guard, basically. Only 60. He spoke the whole sentence in the format and cadence of a joke, and there were many among Magnus's men who laughed good-humored with him. That is barely a handful. You must trust me deeply. We are kin, of course. I will honor your trust and treat each of your men to a feast here in the square. Invite them all. Bring tables, bring meats and breads and the apples. And more of this mead, Harold added. He and Magnus exchanged a look, Harold smirking, Magnus feigning annoyance, but still smiling. And the men, bring cargo and goods from the ship. Much have we to demonstrate to this king. Much loot to show and find treasure. Let me show off my wealth some as we feast. Magnus laughed. The tables were brought before them and set out in a large circle, while runners were sent to fetch the remainder of Harold's men from the ships. They were instructed each to bring something of value to show to the king and the army of Norse. The tables were then covered in food and good drink and circulated by many warriors. A great fire was lit in the center, and music began to play as the warriors all slowed their chatter to eat. I would be most pleased to see this treasure, Magnus said to Harold, who sat at his side in the place of honor. You know, Harold, I have heard some small tale of this grand wealth you won during your time in the far-off savage lands. Ah, yes, Harold said with a mouthful of good venison, then washed this down with more mead. He cleared his throat. Yes, my reputation goes before me. And what else have you heard? Come, regale me with tales about my own adventure. I'm sure they are myriad, Have I bested any trolls in your hearing? Or perhaps I conquered all of the holy city alone? Magnus laughed and drank of his own goblet of ale. Nothing quite so fantastic as those, but there are stories that are spectacular. The men grew quiet and reserved seeming. It is said by some that you saw my father, the Saint Olaf. Is that so? That is something that I have seen, yes. He came to me when I was arrested in Miklagard. His vision came to me to assure me that I would be well tended while I was in the prison. It was his coming that gave me faith I needed to stay strong through the incarceration. He raised his cup in a silent salute and then drank. To the Saint Olaf. Skål! The whole of the gathered army said together. The meal was shared in joyous spirits, and with all the feeling of community. This comforted Harold greatly. Too often had he been forced to rely on his sense of danger when treating with someone who looked pleasant and felt rotten. Here, with his nephew, in what should have been a hostile war camp, he felt at ease. Never would he be fond of a grinning face that hid the dagger. If he was going to be killed, he'd rather see the man coming and know the snarling look of death upon his face. Better a wild warrior with teeth bared than a sniveling sycophant who'd poison the soup. Men danced around the fire, drink was had by all, feasting was done, song sung, story told, prayers and devotions shouted at their God, and all the while honor conferred onto the men who sat as kings. So then, my new friend, Magnus said. He turned to the man and spoke quietly. Finally, thought Harold. He knew he needed to wait for the king to make the overture for their discussion. He needed Magnus to feel some modicum of control, or it might never happen. Shall we move to the tent and speak of kingdoms and war? I'd rather talk of peace, my friend Magnus. I think I would much rather talk of peace. Let us go to the tent then, speak between us, and decide the future. Away from the prying eyes of all my enemies, Harold muttered to himself. He took a long, contented drink from the cup of mead. Then he turned to the man who'd brought this cup. He stood there, waiting, and Harold caught his eye, and he paid him close attention. Bring more mead, the king commanded. I don't plan on being done this for some time. There is much we have to mete out here. This is to be a reckoning or justice, then? I agree, in fact. Harold stood, and another cup of mead was put into his hands. Friends, I want to thank all of you for the great hospitality you have shown me. More so, of course, is that of your king. We go now for the tent. Much is there to speak of. All of you, Magnus said, are here encouraged to eat and drink, revel and be merry within this camp. You are all welcome here and protected. The whole crowd cheered and raised their cup and banged the tables. Lord, Jarl Ivar began, shall I come too? Harold shook his head. Not you. It shall be the king and I, with an attendant each. You stay, eat and listen to music. He leaned down. And be ready. The Jarl Ivar nodded and returned to his plate. Magnus made a show of waving to the square and turning for the tent. Magnus! Magnus! Harold! Harold! The men shouted. Harold Sigurdsson and his retainers Arik and Håkon went to the tent following the retinue of Magnus, sensing no trouble and trusting his powers to be able to defend himself if he needed to. He took only his attendant Einar and left the retainers and guards outside. While they trusted their extravagant and eccentric lord to handle himself, they knew that if he were attacked in the meeting, he'd be overwhelmed. Magnus held the advantage in all things within this camp. If that were to happen, they knew their only recourse then would be to draw steel and slaughter as many here as possible. Honor would demand it. Håkon and Arik, who'd both been proud Varangian guards, walked with their lord to the tent opening, watching him go in and watched the canvas close behind him. Then they turned and faced the feasting square with their hands on their swords and expressions grim. Each remembered the joviality they'd shared with the Lord Harold when he was the commander of the Varangian Guard, and all things seemed easy. They would raid the seas, fuck beautiful Anatolian women, win great wealth every month, drink and eat the best foods of the world, and lay under the stars in health and contentedness. It was a perfect life. Then their lord had cut the balls off and eyes out of their emperor of Rome, and they had been forced to flee the mother city of Miklagard. Everything had changed for them then. The lord leader of theirs was not some fun-loving boy. There was a hard ruler within that would do anything for the sake of his victory. Their respect and fear for him grew immeasurably. He became their commander more than their friend. There were times they knew he chafed at this treatment, but they knew also that he appreciated being in this position to try and tempt them from their high respect postures. Here they stood, listening to the music and knowing they would not be able to hear the talk from within. Inside the tent, Harold looked down on the table prepared with Magnus. There were chairs set on either side, and attendants stood on each man's right. "Should we have the attendants go?" asked Magnus. "Get out," Harold replied. But Magnus's attendant said. Harold looked to Einar hard, and the man left without a word. This done forced Magnus's man to do the same, or prove that his lord commanded less over him and his men than Harold, and he'd probably be executed for it. They sat there staring at each other for a time after the men were gone, the king with rich lands and the lord with great riches, neither flinching nor showing a measure of concern on their calm, stern faces. Magnus looked down from the map first. At the map first. Harold continued to stare straight at him. They both drank from their cups. "Uncle Harold, King Magnus, was this ever a war you thought you could win? I just wanted your attention. I think I have it." Magnus raised his eyebrows quickly in acknowledgement. "You have. You sailed against me with foreign warriors, Swedes, Norse, Danes, brought the whole of the north with you, didn't you?" "I needed to make sure you would listen." Magnus cocked his eyes. "Listen to what? This?" "To my offer. You see, King Magnus, I want this kingdom. I want the whole of the north under my hand." He looked at the map hungrily. "I have wanted it for all my life." "You want my kingdom?" Harold looked him in the eyes. "Yes." "And why should I give you anything?" "Because the war has been too hard on you. You aren't able to keep it going." "Is that so? What makes you think that?" "This meeting is happening for a reason. You sent me a missive inviting me here for a reason. You see, I figured it out. You're out of money." This caused a twitch in Magnus's eye, but Harold betrayed nothing, whether he noticed or not. "And you? You have money?" "I do. You see, that's what I've been fighting with." "We have both been fighting with what we have most. You and your men, your lands. These are the weapons you bore against me. And I bore riches to fight the powerful King Magnus. Your kingdom will only fight for you so long, though, good King Magnus. Your men need to get paid. The same old enemy to fight, King. Money, money, money. It is the one thing I have more of than anyone in the world. I am Caesar, Pharaoh. I am emperor. I am king already, because my hoard rivals the coffers in heaven. You think I'm done? No. Then go on. I could fund this war another 100 years and still have enough to sail on the capital of Rome, which my cousin is already sacking, as we speak, probably. The world is about to shake for the fact that Yaroslav is going to be burning Troy down. Again. Magnus nodded, understanding that he didn't literally mean the fabled city, but Miklagard. And here you are, boasting of wealth to a king you claim you could destroy with a wave of your hand. If undoing my kingdom with this wondrous wealth were what you wanted, you wouldn't be here. You would be a wolf in the mountains hunting me and my men down in the night. But you accepted the invitation. Here you are, bragging of endless money and asking me for my kingdom. It is a strange time indeed. I, an exiled lord of Norway, am offering to buy your kingdom, good Magnus. They stared at each other. Half, Harold said. Half. Harold nodded. Done, Magnus laughed. You'll give me half your hoard, and you'll give me half of yours. We split the treasuries, the powers we both have. Your rule is greater, my treasure is greater, and even trade. Magnus let out a disbelieving laugh that was all breath. You're insane. And thank God. I think that's the only reason you can understand me. I think you might be among the few in this fucking realm who can. No, I don't think it's insanity that understands you. Or me, Magnus said. It's power understands power. Power is the only thing that can understand power. There is no substitute or equivalency. There is only the powerful and the powerless. I have spent too damn long being on one side of that. And I will do anything to get it. And here we are, the most powerful men in the North, exchanging powers. You are the one buying. I have the power, Magnus reminded him. If you think money isn't power, you're a fool. And I don't think you are a fool, King Magnus. You know well what we are shifting the planes of the earth right here. It's always been power. That won't go well in the country we mean to lead, Magnus said. Harold looked at him. No, he replied, thoughtful. My advisor has already suggested I make no concession to you, that I but throw you out and continue this war. It's his thought that I shall win eventually and thus need offer you nothing. Is it that man Einar? The one who seemed to so displeased I was here? It matters not which ones they are, they will not succeed. I wish this war done, and the offer you make is too much to refuse for this, but we cannot let the people think it's been bought and sold. They always need more than that, don't they? They need to think that this was born of some godly revelation, that Christ himself put the idea into our heads, and here we are to broker a peace between us and cease all the fighting. That's what the skalds will write. Harold laughed, then poured himself more mead from the ewer on the table. The skalds will write of me what it is I want them to write. The stories you've heard of me are as true as any scripture, good king. Embellishment has never been an excuse to discount the reputation of a ruthless man. That's what you are, is it? That's what we both are. That's why we're here. We both want something the other has. The other has it. You are willing to part with half your kingdom to get my money. I'm doing the other. That's what the war was for, then. That wasn't war. You know war, good king. You know what real war is like. You were campaigning when I arrived and started the pillage here. That's not what the real war looks like. But to take your meaning in what I was fighting for, your means were stretched already, and now you're ready to meet with me and offer me what I want. If you are so fond of war and think so little of my coffers, then why come here at all? My friend tried to kill me. Allies are hard to trust unless you pay them well. That's a lie. I know you, Uncle Harold. You are impatient. Come, how long have you sought out this kingdom here? As you said yourself, you were raiding and plundering the southern lands so you could buy then the north? Both can be true, good king. Both can be true. So what then shall we tell our people? Most of my men are Christian. Most. I saw the crosses. Yours are too. Most of them, Magnus agreed. Then we do some ritual at a table with many witnesses. You offer me 2 cups of wine and ask which one I'll take. No, let's make it sticks. Seems more ritualistic. You take the nearest, and I'll say that with it, I give you half my kingdom to govern. We'll speak that we shall share in the rule together, and then you come with lavish gifts tomorrow and pay me what is owed, but call it an act of pious love and a boon to help with the governing of this new kingdom we enter into together. That'll work. I'll have Theodore for my skull write this out, as we've said it. But know this, Harold, power is still what I say it is in my kingdom. I make you my co-ruler, and we will king this place together. But I am first among these. When we are both together in one place, I am the first in the ruling. Understand? I do, and agree. Do not hate me if I spend much of my rule away from you, good king. I would rather this be the case, Harold. For together I will call together a grand thing. For tomorrow. And have material to make for yourself a camp? Yes? Of course. Then go to your own camp tonight and return tomorrow. Come to the thing, and I will transfer the title to you. Not you, Harold said. What? Why not? Because I need legitimacy by a different source than the king I warred with and need to rule by. Further, it will make you look weak doing such a thing. Is there a clergy present who could entitle me here? No. My priests do not come on the war path with me. A nobleman, then? Well, Thorer of Steg is the most wealthy and powerful nobleman here. Should he convey the title to you? He will be there. He can present you a crown too. I have a crown, he smiled. But that is good then. Thorer. Harold mused the name. It should fit into the story then. Excuse me, everyone. And what I feel should not have be said, but the fighting between us stops. These destructive raids you have conducted on me and my men must end. Raid elsewhere, King of Norway. Harold nodded, but smiled. Denmark, he said, nodding. I think I shall continue to raid in Denmark and England. Raiding England is a good choice. Their constant feuding makes them weak, easy. You know their king is now a man called Harfoot. I don't care who's the king of England. I really don't. Magnus shrugged. Very well, then. I care that just... He sat straighter and leaned back. I just became king of Norway. The king! Another king in Norway. Magnus reminded him. I'm king. I'm the fucking king. King of Norway. He lifted his arms in triumph and said, quiet. For the moment he dreamed of so long was now upon him. Oft had Harold of Norway thought about when he would be the king. He knew it was his destiny, but he still wondered. The glory field? Would he stand amid cinders and rent steel on a battlefield? His enemy shattered and his rule uncontested? Often had he wondered, and now by purchase he'd made himself king of Norway. Harold Sigurdsson. Well, we'll have to start touring this kingdom of ours. Feasts and gifts, I have many lords to meet. War has been destructive, and so we reunify. We have a strong army between us, and gold! Yours was a strong kingdom. Ours will be the strongest kingdom. He raised his cup. To my kingdom! To my kingdom. End of chapter 34. And a damn good one, I think. Harold Sigurdsson is king! Thank you all for sharing. Thank you all for joining me. So, goodbye.